Are you ready?
All right, let's do it.
Welcome to Con La Familia.
Always learning together.
I'm Therese Shields.
And I'm Chelsea Edge.
Chelsea, since this is our first episode ever, maybe we should give our listeners a little background on who we are. I'll let you go first.
All righty. I was a secondary English teacher for 8 years, and I was perfect every day. No mistakes.
Me too. Minus the secondary English. Didn't you teach in far-off places?
I did. Germany and Japan. Es war toll, subarashi desu.
Which means...
It was cool. What about you? Where have you taught?
Well, I started teaching in South Africa with adult readers, so we have English in common. But my passion is science, teaching 3rd through 6th grade at various points in my life, and even pre-service teachers in college.
So here we are, just two educators interested in exploring the world of education.
You know, teaching is an interesting profession. As a new teacher, I felt like the expectation was I needed to know everything all the time, no matter what.
I completely understand. I remember sitting in my first faculty meeting, and it felt like everyone was speaking a different language because I didn't know any of the acronyms for things.
Exactly. There are so many acronyms to learn your first year, among other expectations. I remember sitting in a faculty meeting at Spicewood Elementary. My principal turned to me and introduced me as the science expert on the campus. I was a brand new teacher, and I was terrified.
That sounds rough. I definitely felt like I was pretending for a lot of my first year. So to any of you out there who feel that way, you are absolutely not alone.
Which is why we are here. This podcast series is designed for teachers who have questions about instructional practices, have stories and celebrations to share, and are just ready to dive deep into teaching.
I don't have a board to write my objectives or class plan, but here's our general idea. We'll start out by looking at a question one of you submitted and getting some expert help. Next phase will be a tech corner, followed by a segment we're calling My Favorite Classroom Story, and ending with shoutouts to success.
We asked some folks to submit questions during the last Epic Saturday event, and we got a really good one. How do you really allow for differentiation when you have a classroom of 30? It can be difficult to make separate worksheets for separate groups most days.
Oof, differentiation is a tough one. I will be completely honest, it took some time to wrap my head around how this could be successfully done, let alone with a class of 30.
I completely agree, which is why we have titled this series of episodes Something Something Differentiation. And since this is a pretty big topic, today we will start off with an overview of differentiation and follow up with a deeper dive into specific areas in additional episodes of this series.
To answer this question, we've brought in an expert. Samantha Calvert has been working with SAISD as an instructional specialist. This is her 12th year with the district, and she has graciously agreed to answer some questions related to our topic of differentiation.
Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Samantha, what is your definition of differentiation?
What a loaded question. Really, it's just thinking about every student in your class and how they are relating to the content that you have in your class, and giving them the ability to access the content at the level that they are most capable of accessing it, which sounds crazy, right? Like that seems huge and big and a lot.
Overwhelming.
Right? Because you have kids that are capable of accessing it a grade level above where you are and a grade level below, and some of our kids 3 and 4 grade levels below, right? And so that just seems very overwhelming. But I think at the core of it, that is what it is, right? Providing students a way to access grade level curriculum coming from wherever they are along the spectrum of content.
That's a great definition. I like that. And you're right. It's very overwhelming. Why should we differentiate?
I think at the end of the day, right, like we are in education to provide an education to all students. And if we're not thinking about all students as individual students, then we're not really thinking about all students. We're thinking about a lot of times that like core average of our students, right? The middle of the road, let's get the most kids we can, and everyone else just sort of floats along, and they're here or they're not here. But at the end of the day, we've made a commitment to parents, to the community at large, and to our students that we're here to educate all of them. And so in order to do that, we have to, at some level, differentiate, or we're not educating all of our students.
Okay. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that it starts in education where students shouldn't feel like they're floating along in life. And we don't want that. We don't want them to become adults and feel like that's their whole purpose is just to kind of float along in life and, well, if I get ping pong here or there, and not really make those mindful decisions going forward with what they want to do in life.
Absolutely. And students learn really quickly if they can hide, that they will hide in a classroom. If I can sort of pretend to get along with what I'm doing, that I'm going to, because I don't want people to know that I'm not learning at the same speed as everybody else, whether that be slower and now I'm labeled stupid, or faster and now I'm labeled a nerd or a dork, right? Like, kids want to be able to hide into that medium average if they can. And as soon as they learn that they can, they will. And then it's much harder to notice them.
Oh, absolutely. From personal experience, because I'm dyslexic, I hated to be called on because I knew that it was just going to go wrong. So it was such an anxiety-driven thing, and I think that a lot of students feel that anxiety of being called out on, and if they can hide, then they're safe. They feel safer.
Absolutely. And the second that they feel unsafe in the classroom, right, like, you've lost them. And so again, differentiation, so huge, so overwhelming in so many ways, right? But it's a way for students to feel safe. It's a way for them to feel like they can be successful in a class. And a lot of times we pigeonhole differentiation into just like the work that kids are doing, but some of it is how we interact with kids in our class, right? Like, knowing your students and knowing your kids, that I can't cold call this kid in the middle of class, or they're never going to answer another question again in my class, right? Like, those pieces are also differentiation, right? Knowing who your kids are and how they interact with content so that they don't have to hide, but they can still feel safe and willing to engage in the content.
It almost sounds like differentiation and just those SEL practices and social emotional just abilities to see our kids and where they're at emotionally.
Absolutely.
It goes hand in hand.
I might be jumping ahead in the like official series of questions and all of this, but
I might be too.
But when I talk to teachers about, and like, that's always right, like, how do I differentiate? The very first thing I tell kids, like, 90% of differentiating is knowing your students, right? And just knowing who they are, both how they interact, how they are socially, how they are in the like skills of the content, how they interact with teacher to student, student to student. Do they prefer to work individually, in groups? Do I do well with word problems? Do I not do well with word problems? Like, do I need color? All of those things, like, knowing your kids is 90% of the battle with differentiation.
I absolutely agree. Okay, so let's go back to the series of questions. Are there different kinds of differentiation, and then what can we differentiate?
I think just thinking about, are we differentiating the mode that students are accessing the work? Are we differentiating the work that students are doing? Are we so it's a lot of like the content itself, and then how we access the content, and then how we show that we know the content. And so I think in that realm, like, those are kind of the three big ways that we can differentiate in class. And I think, honestly, you can differentiate anything. Like, everything you do in class can be differentiated for your students. And we get really overwhelmed and like, oh gosh, does that mean I have to make 30 different assignments for 30 different students because they're all different? And I think that comes down to really, right, like, knowing your students and knowing your assignment. And so if I think about I can differentiate anything I do in class. Part of that is my questioning, right? I know my students. I know this kid really like is operating at a meets or a master's level kid. They ask me a question, my response is going to be, well, I don't know. What do you think? Well, I don't know. Try it. See what you can do. Versus my kid that's operating at a grade level behind, 2 grade levels behind. My question might not be that open-ended, right? It might be, okay, well, what do you think the first step should be? And so thinking about that in terms of, I don't have to make a new assignment for each kid, but I can ask them different questions as I'm supporting them. I can also look at let's say there are 15 problems that we're doing in a day. And I can, in my head, go, okay, I know in order to truly show mastery, I need to answer number 3, 7, and 9. And so then as I'm walking around with kids and I have a kid that's struggling, I might go, hey, I just skip to 3. I want you to do 3 right now. Don't worry about 1 and 2. We'll come back to it in a little bit. Go to 3. I want to see what you can do on 3. And so then you get those kids that might take a little bit more time to process to the stuff that you really want to get them in, like, their hands dirty with. Versus, I know question 12 is kind of a stretch question. So my kid that I know is needs to be extended, right? Might be GT, or just really like into whatever we're learning at this moment. I might go, hey, don't worry about these right now. I want you to skip to 12. Like, I really want to see how you're thinking on 12. And so it becomes now how the kids are interacting with the content, as opposed to you get this assignment and you get this assignment, and because teachers don't have time for that. Like, they're trying to make phone calls home and make grades and think about like reflecting on their lessons and all of that. There is too much in a day for that. And so thinking about really like, I know my students really well and I know my assignment really well. And so then I can differentiate my questions, which questions they are answering. I might, for one kid that I know needs to be extended, I might go, hey, I want you to come up with a new problem that does the same thing that problem 14 does. Or a kid that I know is really struggling, I might go, hey, I just want you to look at your partner's work for number 2 and write down the steps you saw that your partner did to solve it. And so you can really manipulate everything that you're doing based purely on your students without having to create a whole bunch of new things for all your students. So.
No, you made a really good point of being able, it doesn't have to be a bunch of different sheets. It could all be on one sheet that you've put together, but just certain questions are the ones that extend for the ones that need the extension, and the ones that kind of fundamentally build upon, so that way they can get to where you want them to get to. I really like that. That's a great point. So what steps can I take to be more efficient at differentiation if I was a teacher in the classroom again, or a brand new teacher?
So I think the two, and I'm going to say this so many times, right? Like, the two big things are like knowing your students and knowing like the material that we're doing in class. And I feel like adding steps to like knowing your students gets like, because like human interaction is messy. And so there's not like a set of like these steps to do this, right? Like, learn their names, do an interest survey, right? Like, that's not real human interaction. And so that piece takes time. But then like when I'm thinking about the material that I'm doing for the day, right? Like, the very first thing I would say is just like sit down and do it. Like, you were a student, like do the work. And then as you're doing the work, the things that I'm always looking for, right, are like almost like what level of questions each like piece of the activity is, right? Like, what are things that are more like introductory parts of the lesson? What are things that are kind of like the extension parts of the lesson? And also thinking about, do I have an extension part of the lesson? Because I think a lot of times we get really stuck in differentiation on like our kids that need scaffolds and supports, and we forget about our GT kids and our kids that are getting it. And we're like, oh, you got it. Go be a peer tutor, right? And that's not fair to them. And so like making, like when I'm thinking about my lesson, right, after I've done it, do I have some like introduction type questions, those building block questions, but do I also have some extension questions? And then thinking about what are the skills that I want the students to have at the end of the day, and which questions are absolutely crucial to that. Because I think we build really good activities and then we get really focused on like the kids need to do them all and they need to complete them all and they need to, right? And that's not true. Like everybody doesn't need 17 problems to learn how to multiply, right? Like some people need 17 problems and some people do too. And they're like, cool, got it. What's next? And so thinking about, right, like those kind of like crucial pieces of the lesson that we really need to make sure we hit, because a big piece, right, is we have a lot of kids that need some extra processing time. And so I don't have time to do 17 problems.
Absolutely.
And so thinking through all of those pieces to begin with. And I like, so when I was, well, pretty much for my whole teaching career, I would like to say that I got to a point where I didn't need this, but that's not true. And so I would literally like print it out and like have it with me. And I'm very color coordinated person. So I like would highlight the different colors, and I made sure to pick like purples were always my like crucial colors, right? And blues were always my like extender colors, and pinks were always my like, ooh, I'm struggling, go back and do these problems. And I did that very much because I would carry it around, and I didn't want kids to be like, why am I doing a red problem? Like, is that bad? Or why am I doing a green problem? Is that really easy? Because a big piece, right, like we talked about it, like you want your kids to feel safe, and you don't want them to feel like they need to hide, or like they have like, oh, I'm getting this special problem. And so like giving them, and that's why even when I would talk to them, it was very much like, ooh, that's interesting. I want to see how you do this problem. And so it was always phrased as I want to see how you do it, or I'm interested to see what happens with this one, or, ooh, that's really interesting. Take it and go apply it to this one. So they feel like I'm not just skipping around because she doesn't think I can do all the problems. I'm skipping around because she's really excited for me to do this problem.
Right. So your excitement has to play into that.
Absolutely. Very much all about phrasing, all about how we present it to kids. And it's why I always color-coded with just weirdo colors and not like green, yellow, and red, because I'm going to carry it around, right? Because I want to be like, oh, 15, right? Like I want you to do 15 based on what I can see, like what your work looks like and what I have in front of you. And I'm not going to magically remember that 15 was that problem. And so I would carry it around with me. And so then they're looking at it because kids are curious and they want to know, like, why'd you pick that one? And so they're going to look at my paper and they're going to be like, it's green. And I'm going to be like, yeah. And they're going to be like, it's easy. Versus it's purple. What does purple mean, miss? I just like purple, and like move on. And so then you're destigmatizing this idea of skipping around.
Exactly.
And then you're also normalizing, we don't have to do things in order, right? Like it doesn't have to go 1 to 10. Which I also think is really important, because the number of times I've watched a kid take a test and start at number 1 and just get stuck.
They can't get through.
And you're like, pick a different problem.
Absolutely.
And there's this like normalization of like, no, I have to start at number 1. I have to go in order, and I have to complete every single one of them, right? And so this also brings in that like, no, like make your life easier. Like do the things that you know. I don't know how to do this problem. Cool, then pick a different one. And so it also gives them that like flexibility in class, and it normalizes it in a way that you don't always see. And I think that like I would want a teacher just in general for content purposes, right, to like complete the material that the kids are going to complete. And so adding this extra step of just thinking about what each question really does for the lesson is really not that much of an extension. And so then at that point you're ready for differentiation. Like you don't have to work for 2 hours to like create this whole like differentiation plan, right? Like I have my plan right there, and it was really just thinking about the different parts of the lesson and where I can go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with that. Well, I feel like our time is come to an end, But to kind of sum up everything, what I'm hearing for differentiation is you don't need to make a ton of copies. You can differentiate the questions on just one sheet. Students don't need to do all the questions. It's good to let them skip around because that's good practice in general of if you get stuck on one thing, you don't have to stay on that one thing. Try to move on to something else and then come back to it if possible. And then our GT kids, don't bog them down with a bunch of work. Quickly move them to the skill level that they need, and then give them something that they're gonna be excited about. So like a puzzle activity to do when they're finished, or like some sort of research that they can really dive deep in and apply their knowledge that they just learned in class.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
No, I think you took all the thoughts already out of my head. I think that's really it. I think just thinking about, like, again, it all goes back to, like, know your kids and know the activity you're giving them. And if you know both of those really well, then differentiation is just what you're doing in the middle of it all.
I love that. Know your kids, know the activity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Samantha, for joining us on our podcast series for our very first episode of Something Differentiation. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been delightful.
Yes. We hope to have you visit us again sometime.
Absolutely. Just let me know when.
Not to change the subject, but it's about that time. One of my favorite parts of this podcast series, story time.
Ooh, I love a good story time.
Me too. And we have a good one from us.
Well, teachers have to model. Modeling is an important part of teaching. So that's what we're going with instead of we didn't book somebody else to share a story.
Although we did have a really good one, but I think that they're super busy right now. So we'll have to circle back to them.
Yeah, we'll circle back.
All right. So as we are going to model, would you like to go first?
Sure. Okay. It was about my third year of teaching, and I had created this beautiful lesson. I was super excited about it. And I remember walking in the school building thinking, like, nothing's going to derail this. This is happening. We had been talking about transcendentalism, and they were going to be writing about a peaceful time in nature. So it's going to be this fun writing assignment. And so I managed to stay focused during my first period, my second period. And even though the kids were very squirrely that day, I was like, no, we're doing this. And I was just really driving home the fact that they were doing this assignment. And then it gets to my fourth period, and they were even more squirrely. And I was like, no, we're writing this beautiful time in nature story, and we're all going to enjoy it. But so I get the kids kind of focused, and even though they keep telling me, like, Miss, the weather's getting really bad, I'm like, no, we're writing our stories. I was just one track. And finally, we hear an announcement, and there's a hurricane, and we have to evacuate the school. We have to evacuate the town, and we are leaving. We have to leave within the next 30 minutes or so. And all the kids were like, Miss, I told you. Like, yeah, you did. That's on me. You told me. So that is my time that I tried to make my students write a peaceful nature story in the middle of a hurricane.
Did you tell them? And I'm telling you, now it's for homework.
Oh, yeah, that would have been good. Well, I guess you're just going to have to write this for homework. Oh, gosh. What about you?
I was in my third year teaching at Spicewood Elementary, and I was teaching third grade. Third and third. And is the end of the day. It was time to sign their agendas because that's what we did at the end. We'd put positive notes. I'd put like, hey, could you please help remind so-and-so of X, Y, and Z expectation? And I would stamp their planner if there really wasn't anything happening or any notes. So as I'm doing all of those things, at the end of the day, from the corner of my eye, I see my student.
Oh, no. What?
He is just launching his lunchbox up and down, banging it against the desk, and then just it's flying through the air. I mean, he has it by the handle, but it is flying through the air. And I look over, I'm like, hey, what's going on over there? And he said, there's ants. There are ants in my lunchbox. And so he's still banging it. And I see these tiny little ants flying through the air onto other kids.
What a visual.
It was just like, oh my goodness. Little did I know, I had an ant problem that happened during the summer before I came back. And since there's little holes and ants go through tiny little holes in their cubbies, I didn't realize that they were like making nests back there. So in his cubby, there happened to be an ant nest, which then he had his lunchbox cracked open and they made their way into their lunchbox.
Oh,
He made sure to get rid of them before he saw Mom, but
I'm sure the rest of the class was just sitting back calmly while this was all happening.
oh, everybody was very zen.
Well, we know that there are a lot of great classroom stories out there, so we want to hear yours. You can submit them to us at conlafamilia@saisd.net, and we're going to choose lucky ones to get read on the air.
Yes. So we're looking for all kinds of stories. Funny, inspirational, heartwarming. We're looking for stories that bring us together and remind us that we're not alone in this teaching world that we live in, even when everything goes wrong. So do you know what I love about our next segment?
What?
Shout outs to success. If I had the technical skills, I would edit some kind of buzzard or air horn. Frank is definitely going to edit some kind of buzzard or air horn. But I don't right now, but Frank does. And so we're all going to do a happy dance as we share these with you and listen to a buzzard or air horn later inputted by Frank.
We're very invested in adding sound effects.
Yes, for sure. So what's our first one?
Anonymous shared, I became an instructional coach.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Another person shared that they are proud of getting into the National Board Certification cohort.
Ooh, awesome.
Tara Campbell is amazing.
I agree. Shout out to Ever Rabadan, who coached football for the first time and has been to every athletic student game. He's been on top of it.
Ooh, that is on top of it. Every athletic student game.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's impressive. Shout out to Gracie Bell, whose team live streamed an epic Saturday at minimal cost.
Awesome work, everyone. It's always fun to have the small celebrations to keep you going.
I agree. And thanks, everyone, for submitting your shout outs. Hey, Chelsea. We're at the end of episode 2.
Woohoo! As always, we're looking for more questions to answer, classroom stories to share, and more shout-outs to success. You can email them to us at conlafamilia@saisd.net.
Also, don't forget to join us for our next 50-50 day on January 2nd, Siempre Bilingue, January 20th, Epic Saturday, January 27th, and our first ever mid-year new teacher orientation, February 3rd.
Nice!
This podcast is supported by the TSL Initiative and teachers like you who are also practically perfect in every way.
What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. We can't see the end, but we'll see it through.